All right, so as of this broadcast, thousands of kids remain in limbo. We just had the first deadline that was court-ordered to reunite migrant families. It's come and gone. The fate of our NATO alliance also seems to be in some kind of limbo as President Trump arrives in Brussels to meet with some not-so-happy U.S. allies. It is sure to be an uncomfortable couple of days. Let's get some perspective on the war abroad and at home. Former Secretary of Homeland Security Michael Chertoff, also the author of a book you must read, Exploding Data. You're worried about cybersecurity? Read the book. All right, welcome to Primetime, Secretary.
Good to be on.
Pleasure. All right, so let's start with the immediate, and then we'll get to what's going to happen in NATO, and then we'll get to the book and how we deal with this other war at home, cybersecurity. Separating kids. You were one of the architects of Operation Streamline. You had a problem with illegal entrance then during the George W. Bush administration. You had to figure out how to deal with it. You looked at the problems of families and kids, and you made a decision. What was it?
Well, we actually kept them together. We actually created facilities that would allow us to keep the families together while they were being processed and ultimately deported. Now, one thing that I have to make clear is most of our problem with illegal migrants were economic migrants. They were looking for a better job. Now we have a different sort of migrant. We have people who are seeking asylum. They're actually fleeing from violence and disorder in their home countries, usually in Central America.
Mostly fakers, we're told. Was that your experience?
No, I think asylum seekers, they're not all telling the truth, but I think a lot of them do flee. Now, some of them are not qualified under the existing law, but many of them believe they may be, and certainly they've got a fair shot. And basically what happens is the Border Patrol makes an initial determination about whether they have a credible basis or not. When you're dealing with asylum seekers, deterrence doesn't work the same way because the choice is either go to jail or get killed, and most people will prefer jail. So I think that creates a different spin on the problem now.
When you heard that what zero tolerance was going to mean under the Trump administration and what they were doing with the kids, what went through your mind?
Well, I'm not really sure what was meant by zero tolerance. My understanding originally was they were talking about prosecuting everybody who came in illegally for a misdemeanor, and then ultimately they wind up getting time served. I did not understand it to mean, frankly, that you're actually separating the families in order to send a message, and I think that's a big mistake. So they've got to unravel that now, and I think the more quickly they can do that, the better off everybody is.
When you look at the situation, is it clear to you that they did not prepare for their own productivity?
I have to say, I think the problem they're having now is they did not process these people from the get-go with an understanding you'd have to keep track of them. Even if you believed that you had to separate families to some extent, and there may be some cases where that's appropriate, you still have to make absolutely sure you know who goes with whom. And it looks to me, again from a distance, as if the lead time that they had and the preparation they did has now put them in a position where they're having a great deal of difficulty matching parents and kids, and that's the problem we have now.
Incompetence, insensitivity, intentionality.
I doubt it was intentional. I don't want to characterize, level of competence. It seems to me that this was done very quickly, and I can tell you from having done numerous types of challenging programs when I was at DHS, these things take an enormous amount of preparation. You have to decide what kinds of records you're going to keep, how you're going to track people.
If you care about who you're separating and what happens to them.
Correct. And if you realize at the end of the day you're going to have to bring them back together. So this looks to me like it was done probably in haste, without adequate preparation. Why it happened so quickly, I can't answer. But I think what they're trying to do now is reconstruct something that would have been easier if they had had a program up front.
NATO. Let's talk about this because it's something that you have taken acute interest in. We know that you're working with former VP Biden and a former head of NATO, an EU leader, in terms of what to do about U.S.-Russian meddling, how to deal with cyber security here at home. So NATO looms large, what's going to happen in Brussels tomorrow and the day after. I want to play for you this mashup of where President Trump has been on NATO and get your take. Here it is.
If you look at NATO, we protect them for a tiny fraction of what it would cost, which is unfair also.
I'm going to tell NATO, you got to start paying your bills.
Because I told the people of NATO, standing right behind me while they were standing behind me, they've been delinquent. They haven't been paying.
I understand this stuff. I really do understand this stuff. NATO is obsolete.
NATO is obsolete, true or false?
False. I have to say, in fact, NATO is more relevant now than was the case 10 years ago.
Why did Trump say that?
I can't explain why he said it.
You must.
But I can tell you that what I see now is, 10 years ago, we thought, well, the Russians are no longer a threat. NATO was mainly operating in Afghanistan and other parts of the world. NATO is back now. We actually have troops deployed close to the border precisely to send a message to the Russians that they should not try to invade the Baltics or Poland.
But the president says that Putin's not a problem.
Well,
Former KGB, but he's not a bad guy. Everybody's going to be okay. He's fine.
I would have to say Putin has been a problem. Obviously, he's been a problem for his neighbors. He's been a problem even for other parts of Europe, and he's been a problem for us because we've seen, and I think there's no real debate about this, even the Senate Intelligence Committee reaffirmed this the other day, that they have tried to influence and meddle with our elections, and I expect they will do it again.
The president says it's an excuse, that you're joining the Democrats, even though you're a lifelong Republican, and just coming up with an excuse for why they lost the election.
This has nothing to do with proving who won or lost or who should have won or should have lost.
It does to him.
There's no question, as far as I'm concerned, as an American, as a voter who wants to have my vote count and have Americans decide these things and not Russians. There's no question in my mind that the Russians have conducted information operations to try to affect our social cohesiveness and our elections. And by the way, not just with us. This has been going on in Europe for a decade.
Sure.
It's not news.
So the idea of this summit, the summit in Singapore with Kim Jong-un was really mostly upside for President Trump just because he made it happen. This seemed like a remote possibility at best. It happened. How he handled the situation and the rights abuses and the despotic nature of that regime, fair criticism. Here, however, the bar, I believe, is different. I want your take, though it matters much more. With Putin, does the President of the United States have to say, I know what you did in my election, it was wrong, and I will stop you and you will pay dearly. What you did in Crimea is wrong. You got to get out. I'm part of NATO. They're afraid of you because of this. You shot down that plane, MH17. It doesn't stand on my watch. Must he talk tough?
I think the president absolutely has to lay down some very clear red lines along what you've just said. He's got to make it clear that occupying parts of the Ukraine is not acceptable. Shooting down a civilian airliner is not acceptable. Meddling with elections or social fabric here in Europe is not acceptable. And not just that we're going to criticize it, but we have troops on the line. NATO is going to stand together and we're going to defend ourselves. Now, that doesn't mean we can't talk to the Russians. Even during the heat of the Cold War and the height of the Cold War, we did have conversations. And there are some areas where we can have a discussion about what we can agree upon, what we disagree. But this is the important thing, Chris. You've got to understand in your own mind what you can give and what you can't give. And ironically, one of the president's criticisms of the Iran deal was that President Obama was so eager for a deal, he closed his eyes to problems. And that's certainly not a mistake we should repeat here.
Now, of course, they're going to have that private meeting. And you can almost feel what's going to happen, Secretary. They're going to go in. Trump is going to come out. He's going to say, I said this, this, and this. And within a matter of hours, if not days, it's going to leak from the Kremlin side that none of it happened. And we'll deal with it unfolding then. That's why so many of us are going. I want to be there, put my own eyes on it. Now, problem back here at home. How to deal with cybersecurity. You wrote this book. There is a theme in it that is very counterintuitive. You say, don't worry about Big Brother, the government, coming in stealing our data, although a real risk and something we have to deal with in private and public sector. You say, worry about Little Brother. Worry about yourself and how you behave on the internet and what you put out there, that is one of the keys to our complaints. How so?
And not only what you put on the internet, but what everybody else around you put on the internet. In other words, when you go out and people upload pictures of you, or you buy something at the store and your credit card data winds up being sent to a credit card broker, or you've got locational information coming as the exhaust of your cell phone, all of this gets collected and gives a picture of your daily life far more detailed than the government could ever want or hope to do.
So is it all about us, or does there have to be law as well?
I think there has to be two things. I think we have to take some responsibility for what we sign up for and be careful about it and be mindful. But I do think we have to level the playing field with some laws. You know, 100 years ago, when photography was invented, it created new threats to privacy, and ultimately the law changed. Interestingly, Chris, right now the Supreme Court has taken some cases that have demonstrated they're now beginning to look at whether the law has to change again.
The Carpenter case with the police about their needing a warrant to get your cell data.
Exactly, because what the court's now saying is, you know, it's not just about keeping your data hidden, it's about who controls the data after it's been collected. And I think that's an important step forward.
With opportunity comes responsibility. The book is Exploding Data, Reclaiming Our Cybersecurity in the Digital Age. Secretary Chertoff, thank you.
Pleasure.
While we're in handshake mode, please promise to come back and help us understand what happens at the summit.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Great.
sir.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. All right.